Do you ever feel like you're just copy pasting your theology from your favorite pastor or podcast? Like you hear someone say, that's not biblical. And you nod like, yeah, totally. Even if deep down you don't actually know why. Like you want to believe what's true. You want to stay faithful. That's partly why you're watching this. You want to be honest. But maybe you've never really built your own theology. And the idea of doing that, it feels
hard,
difficult,
confusing,
scary,
intimidating. Like, what if I accidentally become a heretic? Good news, the odds are not high that you'll accidentally become a heretic. But what you can do is you can build your theology and you can have confidence in it. And so today I'm going to show you how to do that. Let's talk about the major problem. It's that we've outsourced our thinking. Most of us inherited our theology without ever examining it. And then we outsource our beliefs to a denomination, a celebrity preacher, to our family, whatever is curated in our algorithm. And we assume if it sounds good, it must be true. But good theology isn't found in sound bites. It's not once saved, always saved. It's not just follow your heart. It's not the Bible clearly says when you haven't actually read it in context. What we need is more than borrowed opinions. We need an actual biblical framework. And here's how you actually build your theology. It's not from scratch, and it's not from fear, but you can do it with clarity, depth, and ultimately confidence. Because if you're trying to make sense of a doctrine, say election, baptism, hell, you don't want to just type it into Google, because all you're going to get is the loudest voice and whoever paid the most to show up in your algorithm. Instead, you can learn theology for yourself. And here's how. You just run it through 3 layers of theological reflection, and we're going to do that together. Layer 1 is the foundation, the context. This is your bedrock. And I don't just mean a favorite verse or two. I mean the whole story of Scripture, canonically, contextually, and Christ-centered. So what does canonical mean? It just means when we talk about the Bible, it is a whole collection of individual books that come together as a biblical canon. So canonically, here's what we're doing. We're asking the question, where does this idea show up across the whole Bible? Is it rooted in Genesis and is it echoed in Revelation? Or is this just one obscure verse found in Job? And then we move to contextual. And this is where you get out your pipe and you go Sherlock on the text.
elementary,
Elementary, my dear Holmes.
elementary.
Allow me to explain.
So contextually, I'm asking, what's the genre? Who's the audience? What's happening around the passage? Because if I read Paul's letters like Proverbs or treat Leviticus like a TikTok feed, it's going to lead to serious problems. So here's the compass to use to stay oriented when you get lost. Jesus is the interpretive key, meaning where is Jesus in the passage? If we're in the Old Testament, how does it point to the redemptive story? Where is this idea connected to the big picture of the gospel? And if it doesn't align with the story of creation, fall, redemption, and restoration, you may be off course. And when we start reading the Bible this way, it clicks. Because instead of a confusing rule book, it becomes a living, unified story, and you learn how to think with Scripture, not just about it. Layer 2 is tradition. This is the wisdom of the church, and I think this is a massive relief. Because whatever you have questions about, whatever you have fears about, you're not the first person to wrestle with it. For 2,000 years, the church has studied, prayed, debated, and discerned, and you're going to find someone who had some of the same challenges you have. So, why would we ignore that? Now, tradition doesn't replace the Bible, but it does help you check your blind spots, and it clears the fog. You don't have to agree with everything Augustine said, or Martin Luther, or Calvin, but you should know why it mattered. The church fathers, the reformers, the creeds, the confessions, and the global voices. And here's what we're really doing. We're asking, how has the church understood this idea across time and place? We're looking at the ecumenical creeds, right? The Apostles' Creed, Nicene Creed, Chalcedon, where men of God wrestled together to define Christianity. We're looking at the consensus of the global church, not just our denomination. And then the trajectory of how has the church developed its understanding in this area, not just frozen snapshots. And here's what happens when you do that. You're going to get rooted, you're going to gain depth, and you're going to learn from spiritual giants who already fought these battles. You don't have to start from zero. Layer 3 is reason. It's faith seeking understanding. And this is where you come in, because theology isn't memorizing a textbook. What you're really doing is you're synthesizing truths. You're bringing your mind, questions, logic, and life experience to the table. And so part of that comes from using systematic theology books. It comes from actually reading what other authors have written, how they've wrestled with these questions. It's looking at philosophy. I have often found that theology does a better job answering questions, but philosophy does a better job asking them. And then it's real-world application. You're always thinking with the end in mind. Like, how does this shape how I parent, grieve, vote, spend my money? And that means you're bringing your questions, your doubts, you're pushing back, you're wrestling honestly. Like, is this coherent with everything I know about God's character and the gospel? Because if it contradicts the grace of Christ and the goodness of God, I probably need to rethink it. And here's what's really going on here. You're making theology your own. Not what your pastor said, not what you heard online, but something that you've worked through, head, heart, soul. So let's put it all together. Scripture is going to give you the foundation. Tradition will give you the guardrails. Reason gives you ownership. And when you hold those three in tension, not picking one over the other, you're going to build a theology that is deep and clear. And you don't have to fear doing it wrong. All you needed was the tools to do it wisely. And that's exactly what I want to help you with next. Here's some common mistakes where people tend to go off the rails, because I don't think most bad theology comes from evil intentions. Most of the time, it's from imbalance. It's leaning too hard into one layer and then ignoring the others. So I'm going to show you 3 common mistakes people make when trying to do theology and how each one quietly leads you off track. Mistake 1, Bible only, context optional. I don't need tradition, I don't need reason, I just believe the Bible. Sure, Jan.
Sure, Jan.
And that sounds spiritual, right? What they really mean is I believe my interpretation of the Bible, without knowing its context, genre, or historical understanding, is what matters most. That's not submission to Scripture. It's submission to your own lens. You end up cherry-picking verses. You quote Jeremiah 29:11 like it's a universal promise. You treat Proverbs like prophecy. And you forget Paul was writing actual letters, not Instagram captions. And where it leads is certainty without clarity, dogmatism without humility, and confidence in things the Bible may not even be saying. So here's the correction. Yes, Scripture is supreme, but it must be interpreted canonically, contextually, and communally. You can't just rip it out of the story and call it truth, unless you want to be like Thomas Jefferson and create your own Bible. Mistake 2 is tradition with no tension, because on the flip side, some people treat tradition like it's infallible, and so they quote the Westminster Confession like it's Scripture, or they elevate their denomination's statement of faith above the actual faith. And tradition matters, but it is not perfect. Even the best theologians are going to be products of their time, cultures, struggles, and assumptions. And here's where it leads. You stop thinking, and you just parrot doctrines instead of understanding them. And so you confuse fidelity to God with fidelity to your tribe. The correction is tradition's a gift. It's a guardrail, but not a jail cell. And yeah, it should shape your theology, but not replace your engagement with Scripture or reason. It's there to protect you from novelty, not imprison you in rigidity. Mistake 3 is over-reliance on what feels right. This might be the most tempting one. Follow your heart, my truth is valid, God wouldn't do anything that makes you uncomfortable, and before you know it, interesting, I've created a God who, well, he never contradicts me, never challenges me, and seems to agree with everything that I say. That's not theology. That's not God. That's just projection. And here's where it leads. We begin to reshape God into being like a spiritual life coach. We lose the weight of holiness, of justice, of mystery, and theology becomes a mirror instead of a window. Here's the correction. God's good, but he is not tame. Use reason, but let it be shaped by Scripture and tradition, not just your emotional radar. So each of these approaches on their own, they're going to be imbalanced. Bible only with no context, you get blind spots. Tradition with no engagement, you get rigidity. And reason with no authority, you get relativism. But when we hold them together, Scripture, tradition, reason, they're going to create something far better. It's a theology that's going to be robust, it's going to be rooted, and it's going to be real. You're going to lead with a theology that makes sense of the Bible without weaponizing it. It's one that honors the church without idolizing it, and a theology that feels alive but isn't dictated by your feelings, because that's ultimately what we're aiming for. And the reason this matters is because theology isn't academic. Bad theology wounds people. It justifies abuse, it fuels fear, it distorts who God is. But when you build your theology with honesty and humility, you're going to start seeing God more clearly. And that changes everything. Not just how you think about God, but how you live, how you pray, and how you love. And if you've ever wanted to do this, to learn how to think theologically and not just absorb opinions, I built a training just for you. It's called Theology Made Simple, how to think deeply about God without getting overwhelmed. It's either up here or up here, and it's going to show you the exact process I use to break down complex ideas and build robust theology from the ground up. You can also find a link in the descriptions. So let's build something that actually lasts.